Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So today I wanted to talk about I think we are in the Great Tribulation. Okay, so let's talk about the Great Tribulation. So that's actually a term that comes from the scriptures, okay? And so this is Revelation 7. And it says, After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, these are these who are clothed in the white robes, who are they, and where have they come from? I said to him, My Lord, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. Okay, um, so this is a group of people, a multitude of people who come out of the Great Tribulation. And so some different theologies um, try to come up with different reasons who these people could be um, to fit their theology, basically. Like the rapture theology, they, have this being a different group of people. Like maybe they say these are Jewish people, but really, if you look at it, it says a great multitude from every nation, tribes, and peoples and tongues. So it's got to be all of God's people, okay? And it says they come out of the great tribulation, okay? And they washed their robes and they made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Um, so to me, this is pretty strong proof that we are going to go through tribulation and we're going to go through the great tribulation. And I really think we're going through the great tribulation now. So that's one verse about the great tribulation. And then there's this other verse from Matthew 24. We talk a lot about Matthew 24. It's definitely a good chapter about the last days. So it says, Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things that are out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world or until now, nor ever will. Unless those days have been cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Okay, so these verses also talk about great tribulation and um, talks about the elect. For the sake of the elect, God has to, cut these days short, or they won't, no life would have been saved. And so, same thing again. Sometimes people use these verses, to say, well, the elect is the Jewish people or whatever, but I believe it's all of God's people. Um, and then also, too, the abomination of desolation. A lot of people are looking for a temple to be rebuilt, and then because the reason why they're looking for that is because in previous centuries we've had like the story of Hanukkah. There was a king who actually went in the temple and sacrificed a pig, and so that was definitely a fulfillment of the abomination of desolation. But if we look at these verses more like see possible multiple fulfillments. And then one of the things that I've talked about in my videos is that I believe Israel is a temple of God and America is a temple of God. Okay, when you see like if you define a temple as being where God's presence is and where his presence comes from, like his presence is spread to the world from these temples, okay? That then Israel and America definitely fits um, that definition. And and if you actually understand that God sees America and Israel as a type of temple, then you can see why God gets upset when people want to divide the land of Israel. Okay. And also why God gets mad when people don't respect the the nation of America. And and so one of the things is so then we can look for the abomination of desolation being something that goes against those nations. Okay. And so I'm kind of wondering if this document situation that we have with Biden and Trump and now Pence could be the abomination of desolation. And so it's interesting because in these verses, it lists three groups of people like, okay, those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those who are on the housetop must not go down to get the things out in their house. And whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. Okay. So I, I kind of think that the people in Judea who must flee to the mountains would be God's people, that when they see this abomination of desolation, they want to flee. God wants us to um, turn to him in prayer. Okay. Look to the mountains where our help comes from. Send up our prayers to God. Okay. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things that are in his house. Okay. Um, I believe that Biden is the one on the housetop because he is in leadership right now. Okay. Um, so, so basically when they were searching his house, he shouldn't go back into his house to get things out. He needs to let them, um, the FBI find the documents. Okay. But also I think it there's kind of a hidden meaning of like don't um don't try to keep your leadership position. um that you need to let go of your leadership position, because we didn't see Biden needs to humble himself basically, and repent. Okay. But he's trying to save face and keep his leadership position, so he's not being humble. Okay. Um, and then whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. I believe that's Trump and his followers, in the field, in the wilderness. But I do believe that they're going to turn back to try to get um, Trump back his leadership position. Okay, that's going to be the civil war in the last days. Okay. Um, and then woe to those who are pregnant. That would be like God's people pregnant with Messiah. They're about to birth Messiah. Okay, those who are nursing babies would be the followers of Biden, the followers of Trump. Okay. Um, okay, and so then it says, pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. So, because then it says, for then there be great tribulation. So it's possible. So we've been looking at this verse, pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. We've been looking at that verse to be explaining like the day that we should be looking for Jesus to return. But it's possible that it's talking really about the start of the Great Tribulation. Okay. So we'll talk more about the dates that I was looking at. And so what it says about the Great Tribulation is that there be great tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. So what we're going to see during the Great Tribulation is just even more intense tribulation. Okay, just a time in the world that is very unusual. okay? And a time where you're going to want those days cut short, okay? Where everyone's life is sort of hanging in the balance, okay? Um, and really needing God to rescue us from this time. Um, so I talked about in my last video, I talked about Daniel 12:1. Because this says, now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Okay, so I talked about how I believe that Netanyahu returning to be prime minister of Israel, I mean, in kind of a miraculous way, is the fulfillment of this verse that he arose, out of his, um, type of death. And that this Michael, when he returns to power, there's going to be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. Well, that is so true about what's happening with Netanyahu being back in power, is that the nation of Israel is really in an uproar about Netanyahu being back in power. There's been nonstop protests, and then the terrorist attacks have really ramped up too. So, so you could say that maybe when Netanyahu returned to power, was when the Great Tribulation started. Which would have been like, what is it, December 29th, okay, was when he was sworn in for the 6th term. I mean, it was interesting because even before he was sworn in, there was already just a lot of distress going on in Israel, people not happy about him coming back to power, because on the 14th, he was trying to talk in the Knesset, and there was like so much yelling and stuff that he that was December 14th, that you could barely hear him what he's trying to say. um so and the reason why I think that Michael is representative of Netanyahu is set because it says the sons of your people. And I've talked about how I believe the Jewish people are the sons and the Christians are the daughters. Okay. Um, and then so time of distress such as never occurred, the Great Tribulation. Okay. Oh, so here's what I wrote. On December 14th, Netanyahu was trying to address the Knesset, and there was people protesting and yelling from the Knesset. I mean, I think they were part of the Knesset, or I mean, I don't really know much about Israel's political process. If those are like, if they just have an audience watching it, or those people part of the Knesset. I'm not really sure who they were, but they were in that room. And then on December 29th was when he was officially sworn in. Okay, let's see. So the Great Tribulation, when did it start? So I'd like to propose the January 15th as a possible start date for the Great Tribulation. Okay, so a lot of it depends on kind of what happens in the next couple days, or a couple weeks or whatever. So because, okay, so one reason why I was looking at January 15th is that the Passover holiday, the Jewish Passover holiday, happens on the 15th day of the first month on the Hebrew calendar. But what you can say is that January 15th would be like a Passover on the Gregorian calendar because it's the first month on the Gregorian calendar. Okay. And so for the Passover holiday, the Jewish people pick a Passover lamb on the 10th of the month, of the first month. And then on the 14th, they kill the Passover lamb. Okay. So what was interesting, so I was looking to see if, anything kind of happened in January to fulfill kind of these pictures, prophetical pictures. And on January 10th was actually when Tyre Nichols died. Okay. And so I do believe that he could be a type of Passover lamb, that the reason why he was slain, um, the reason why God allowed him to die was because God's using that situation to bring about the Civil War in America. Okay. Um, and so he was actually um, beat up on the 7th, and then he died on the 10th. And so, and I think he could be a good guy. I mean, some of the blacks that, um, got killed by policemen before, um, like, a certain percentage of them are actually criminals, okay? And that they got killed when they were trying to fight back. But Tyre Nichols, without really knowing all the information, because I don't really know what happened before the video and stuff like that, he looks like he could have been somewhat of I mean, they said he was driving, you know, poorly, but he could have been somewhat innocent. I mean, definitely, I don't believe that. I mean, I believe everyone deserves their day in court. And so what the policeman did was definitely wrong. Okay. But, he might be, you know, kind of an exception where, he was actually maybe a fairly innocent person, just being bullied and picked on. Okay. Um, don't know for sure. And then on January 14th, which would be like Passover Eve, okay? And so that's the date that the Passover lamb would be killed. Okay, so that was an interesting day because that was when a Russian missile strike hit an apartment building in Ukraine. 46 were killed, 80 were injured. The numbers might even be higher than that. Um, because um, I might not have up to date information on that. Um, but that was just a really bad situation. And I kind of see this war in Ukraine, I see it as a testing of the Lord to see how we are going to treat his people, because um, there are a fair number of Jewish people in Ukraine, but also Christians in Ukraine. And really, I think they too are, just an innocent group of people being targeted by, this evil person, Putin. Um, and so, and the other thing that's interesting about January 14th is that's actually like Back to the Future Day on the Hebrew calendar, because it's the 21st day of the 10th month. Um, so that's kind of interesting. Um, so we'll see how things play out. On January 15th, too, was when that plane crash happened in Nepal. Um, and then also on that day was when Biden spoke at the Martin Luther King Church for Martin Luther King Day. So definitely interesting stuff that happened on those dates. And but then I mean, we definitely saw things really kind of just revving up and getting more and more just uh, distressful. You know, since that time. Um, so that's what I'm looking at. Um, and then, so then for the rest of that week, January 18th was when Manuel Turan was killed by SWAT team in Atlanta. And so that led to the riots on January 21st in Atlanta, the anti-police riots. So what's interesting about January 21st is that, okay, so that would be like the 7th day of Passover, okay? And so what was interesting about that day was, I mean, this is why I'm really wondering if we entered into the Great Tribulation, because it was just such an awful weekend, the 21st and the 22nd and the 23rd. because we had the riots going on in Atlanta, and then on the 21st was when that mass shooting happened in California at during the Chinese Lunar New Year celebrations, and 11. I mean, at the time they reported 10 people killed, but then uh, another person died, making 11 killed. Um, and what's interesting about the 21st is that that was the fourth year after the blood moon. We were following those three blood moons in a row. Um, and so that's the first. Excuse me, I had to sneeze. Okay, and so that's the first blood moon out of the three. And so it's 4 years later on the 21st of January. Um, so maybe God was giving us a clue about January 21st. Um, so a couple things that's interesting about the Chinese Lunar New Year is they call it the Year of the Rabbit. And so I've been kind of wondering for a while if the rabbit connects to the two witnesses, because like the two ears, I've been thinking about like at Easter time, we have chocolate rabbits and we bite off their ears on Easter. And so it's interesting that we're moving into the year of the rabbit because I think we're moving into a time of the return of the two witnesses. Okay. And then on January 23rd, we had a second mass shooting in California at two farms. Okay. Where 7 people were killed. Okay. And what was interesting about that is that it was Rosh Kodesh, and they sacrificed 7 lambs on Rosh Kodesh. So the 7 killed connects to the 7 lambs on Rosh Kodesh. So just not a really good weekend, okay? And there were so many other things going on that add to, I mean, besides the headlining, terrible events of the mass shootings, there's just so much other stuff going on that is definitely last days type stuff, tribulation type stuff going on. Because we also have the nonstop winter storms that have been going on. Um, and then there's a lot of like smaller stories of people getting killed in various places, not mass shootings, but, murder suicides happening, and, husbands killing their wives, a lot of the stuff that Jesus said was going to be happening in the last days. So I wanted to point out that there's kind of this picture of 7-Eleven from these 2 mass shootings in California. And the reason why I'm looking at that is because in Genesis 7:11 it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. Okay. So, so is God giving us a clue that to point to 7-Eleven? Okay. Now, because what's interesting about this verse is that, so we have Noah being 600 years old. On January 19th, which would be during this week, that first week of, the Gregorian Passover, is the anniversary of the 6 years after Trump was inaugurated. Okay. So Noah being 600 could be pointing to Trump being 6 years after his inauguration. Okay. The 19th was definitely an interesting date because that's the Armenian Christmas day, which is like the last Christmas, okay, on the calendar. Okay. And then we start moving into candle masses. It's also the anniversary of Biden's 2nd year, like by calculations. I mean, the 20th would be 2 years, as the crow flies, is kind of what I say, because his inauguration was on the 20th. But if you do the calculating for 2 years, it ends on the 19th. Okay, so 2 full years, and we see that in scripture, and I've talked about two full years in some of my videos. So I'm definitely looking at that time frame. Okay. At the end of two full years is when Pharaoh has a dream. Okay. Um, and then, anyways, and also on the 19th was when we hit the debt ceiling in America. Okay. So Biden has spent all our money. Okay. And then what was very interesting about that day too is it's 7 months, 11 days after um, June 9th, which was the first um, January 6th commission. Okay, so we see kind of a repeat of that 7-11 number. Okay. Um, and so you could take the second month, say February is the second month. So the 17th day, there's like really kind of three possibilities. I think that this is what makes prophecy kind of like partial right now, and like we won't know until it's fulfilled what day God's going to fulfill this on, but we're looking for a day in the second month. We're looking for a 17th day. Okay, so one thought I had was today is actually 17 days after January 19th, so that's a possible fulfillment of the 17th day. February 8th is actually the 11th month, the 17th day on the Hebrew calendar. So that's a possible fulfillment. Or, of course, February 17th. Okay. So we just got to wait until things happen to see how that gets fulfilled. Okay. So here I brought back this slide about this three supermoons of 2019 to show you that January 21st was the wolf moon. Okay. Um, and so let's see what, yeah, because January 21st was when we had the riots in Atlanta and then the mass shooting in California. So the start of the three blood moons. Okay. So definitely interesting. Um, and that was the 2-year 1 day anniversary of Trump on the 21st. Okay. So that was around, so this blood moon was around Trump's 2-year anniversary date. Okay. And then too, this is from Back to the Future. I put this in a bunch of my videos because, I talked about if you see burning on the left and burning on the right, then you're out of time. And it wasn't until my last video that I noticed that the license plate is from California. And so I'm wondering if God's, also using that as a sign saying, look to California. And so now we've seen these mass shootings in California that point to 7-Eleven. But we've also seen a lot of the weather systems have been starting in California, okay, this year. So definitely a lot of signs coming out of California. And then I did want to point out January 7th. I talked about that in my last video, but there was kind of some new information. That was also a big day because that is actually, okay, so that was actually the 2-year anniversary of Biden's electoral college vote. Okay, so remember, if January 6th didn't happen, they would have voted Biden in on the 6th. Okay, but instead the vote got postponed till the 7th. Okay, and we saw sort of a repeat of that with Kevin McCarthy, because it took him 15 ballots to get him voted in. And so it was finally like in the early morning hours of January 7th that they finally had the 15th ballot and he was voted in. And that, interestingly, was the start of the 118th Congress. So you kind of have an 811 number there. And so I kind of believe that January 7th was the start of the changing of the guard. I mean, we already had Netanyahu was already in Israel, in office in Israel. And so then I believe that things were kind of set in motion in America to start bringing Trump back. Okay. And so the first thing that we saw is now we have the Republicans are in charge of the House. Okay. Um, and um, and the 7th too is interesting because it's Orthodox Christmas, so that's kind of like the second Christmas on the schedule. I mean, there might be 4 total. It just depends how you count. Like the 6th actually might be considered a Christmas. I don't really know because it could be the Armenian Christmas on the 6th, but I don't totally understand the calendar that they're following because they also the 19th mentioned as the Armenian Christmas. So I don't totally know for sure. Um, but we have the Orthodox Christmas on the 7th, and then kind of the new information that I have is that like I mentioned before, that was the date of the Tyre Nichols attack. Okay. And so what we have is sort of the start of the changing of the guard, bringing the Republicans back. And then with the Tyre Nichols attack, it's kind of the start of bringing back the BLM or the anti police protesters. Okay. That all happened during the time of Trump. Okay. Um, now it's like they're back. Okay. Um, so, um, okay. So then I listed, okay, so we got that first week, the 14th, 15th through the 21st. I think new information was, but I already mentioned that about the debt ceiling being reached, okay, on the 19th, okay. And then the second week would be like January 22nd through the 28th, okay. And so on the 23rd was when we had the second mass shooting in California. The 24th was when Pence also had documents, so that was pretty bad. Um, so also saw tornadoes in Texas and Louisiana. On the 25th was when Biden made his announcement about sending tanks to Ukraine. And then Germany also was planning to send tanks to Ukraine. Okay, so the thing that's bad about that is that all that did was make Russia mad because, they talk about it's going to take 2 to 4 months to get those tanks to Ukraine. Um, and so basically, it just got Russia mad because now, they think even more people are against them. And so now they've ramped up their um, bombing of Ukraine. And, so it's, just, I mean, it could also be another desolation that causes another abomination that causes desolation. All it's gonna accomplish is causing more destruction in Ukraine. Okay. So not good about that. Um, and then on the 26th was when the California governor declared state of emergency due to the rioting there. Then, okay, so like I said, then we saw a barrage of rockets shot at Ukraine. Okay, so not good at all. Okay. Um, and then on January 27th was um, when they had a synagogue attack in Israel. Okay, and so that was a terrorist attack in Israel where 7 people got killed. And the funerals were on 11/6 and 11/7 on the Hebrew calendar, okay, which were the 28th and the 29th, okay. So we see kind of a repeat of the 11/7 number, okay. And then on the 27th was when the protests in Memphis, Tennessee started. I mean, actually, on the 27th was when they released the Tyre Nichols video. I mean, which, I actually don't believe in releasing that video because what does it do? It just causes people to protest. I mean, it's another abomination that causes desolation. Okay. And then and also about what was really sad too about the synagogue attack in Israel is that was on International Holocaust Remembrance Day on the 27th. Okay. Just the thinking of we will never forget kind of stuff, about the Holocaust. And so that was sad. And then on 28th, was the continuation of the protests in Memphis, Tennessee, and other places. That was the day that Trump had his rallies in South Carolina and New Hampshire. Okay. And then the third week that I've been looking at is January 29th through February 4th. Okay, so that week was when on the 31st we saw the winter storm Mara. Okay, on February 2nd was when Russia, made another nuclear threat. Okay, I mean, the reason why that stands out is because it's also the day that when they announced that we have this Chinese spy balloon flying over America. So when it talks about cutting the days short, you could see why, because we're under threat now by Russia, and who knows what China's planning. Okay, what was interesting is that today, the 4th of February, is that they actually shot down the Chinese spy balloon. Okay, so what's that mean? Is China going to get mad that that happened? So, it's definitely a precarious time where, you're in trouble if you stand up for yourself, but then you're in trouble if you don't stand up for yourself because, the enemies, are, there's so many enemies in the world wanting to take revenge. Okay. And, which, if you understand that, that's why Israel's in such a precarious position because, if they try to stand up to the terrorists in and around their country, not only do they get retaliated from the terrorists, but also the world kind of comes down hard on them, so they're in a precarious position. Okay. On February 2nd, too, was where I had heard that there was a belief that Russia has entered a new phase in the war in Ukraine. Okay. Which basically their new phase is, let's just, bomb them as much as possible, so, more destruction. So just not a good situation at all. So definitely pray for God's people in Ukraine, because not a good situation. So that's that week. Okay, so let's talk about what's been going on in Israel. I have a little bit of information about their schedule during those weeks. But I could be missing stuff or I could have some of my facts a little off. It's kind of hard because Israel's like a day ahead of us. And so we get the information here. And so sometimes American news is logging the dates based on America's calendar when it actually happened a day ahead. So that's why sometimes it's hard to get really good information about what's going on in Israel. Okay, but hopefully, hopefully my information is fairly accurate. So on the 14th was actually in Israel we saw anti-government protests in 4 cities in Israel. Now they had mentioned that there was protests on the 7th. So these anti-government protests are happening every Saturday night in Israel. Okay. And they actually said that anti-government protests happened on the 7th too. Okay, in Israel. But one of the things that happened was on the 11th in Israel was when the one of the new guys in Netanyahu's government mentioned that they were going to push for judicial quote unquote reform. Okay. And so that gave a new kind of motivation for these protests. Okay, so that makes the January 14th protests kind of stand out more. Okay, because they were protesting against the the um, the judicial reform. Okay. January 15th was when they had a bus shooting. Palestinian terrorists shot at a bus in Israel. Unfortunately, by the grace of God, there was no injuries. On January 16th, okay, so on January 16th was clashing in Israel over proposed judicial system reform. Opposition leaders, okay, so not just on the weekend, but also on the 16th, which was a Monday. Um, Opposition leaders accused the government of threatening Israeli democracy and went as far as warning of civic unrest and even civil war. Okay, so you think we might be in the Great Tribulation when both America and Israel are on the edge of civil war? Um, and then, okay, there was massive protests in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Okay, on the 17th, there was two attacks against the IDF, two terrorist attacks against the IDF. On the 18th was, okay, so the Israeli court actually blocked one of Netanyahu's coalition appointment, okay, because I think the guy is a criminal, okay, and so they probably have some good reasons. Because really, one of the ways that it's interesting because Netanyahu could be fulfilling some of the prophecies about the lawless one because he definitely has some lawless. Some of the reforms and stuff, they're trying to change the laws in Israel and stuff like that. To make it work for them. Okay. And so people were really worried that they were going to have to go into another election cycle. Okay. But I think somehow Netanyahu pulled it together and they're still going strong. And then on the 21st, there was a stabbing attack thwarted at a West Bank farm. More anti government protests because it was a Saturday night. Okay, so then on the week of January 20, so the second week that I'm looking at, on the 25th, they had an attempted stabbing on Route 55 in Israel. Just a lot of unrest in Israel, that they're worried about terrorist attacks. And then, too, as of this week, the second week, now there's worries about these rockets coming from Gaza, okay? So there's not a lot of peace in Israel, okay? Also on the 25th, okay, so this was a big event. The International Atomic Energy Agency, I believe is what IAEA, their leader Grossi, he says now that Iran has enough enriched uranium for several nuclear weapons. Okay, not good news at all. Okay, so another reason why God might want to cut the day short, okay, because we could be all nuked to death. Okay. Um, so we got so we got nuclear fears from Iran, nuclear fears from Russia. So just not a good situation. And they had said that there's that clock, the doomsday clock. They actually pushed it forward because of these nuclear threats going on. Okay. On the 26th, Israeli forces clashed with Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, and 9 militants, 9 terrorists from the Islamic Jihad were killed. Okay. And, they were trying to arrest them. Okay. And they ended, this kind of clash broke out. And, so these 9 people ended up getting killed. Well, so then that caused the Palestinians to start rioting, after that. in the day where another Palestinian coming from the rioting, I think he was shooting at um, uh, the the Israeli police, and so he got killed. Um, and then on January 27th, like right, um, I mean, I think it started right at midnight. Um, was 3 rounds of rockets from Gaza. Okay, there was 3 rounds of rockets from Gaza in the early morning, starting at midnight. Okay, this next thing that I wrote here, Jewish baby dropped and injured on run to bomb shelter. I was supposed to take that out because that actually happened the next week. Okay. Um, but we have the 3 rounds of rockets from Gaza in the early morning. So, but do keep in mind that when the rockets are going off, the alarm goes off and the Jewish people have to run to the bomb shelters. Okay. So, not probably not a lot of fun to be awakened in your sleep and having to run to a bomb shelter. Um, and then after these, with IDF responded to these rounds of rockets with aerial strikes against Hamas. Um, and then the Palestinian Authorities leader Abbas, he announced that he's going to suspend the security coordination with Israel. Okay, so just a lot of upheaval, right? um, Going on. And so these events that are happening that create even more upheaval, that's happening. Okay, because because the Israeli police have actually been rounding up terrorists for like since March, I think. They call it I don't know if I can remember the name of it. But they've been rounding up these terrorists for ever since March. And so this was kind of unusual to have so many people get killed. Okay. Um, you know, as they're rounding up people. Um, and anyways, so also on January 27th, so like I said, that was when the synagogue attack happened in Israel. 7 people killed on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Okay, so I already talked about this. And then on the 28th was when a 13-year-old Palestinian, so now even kids are terrorists, Palestinian kids are terrorists. He opened fire on Jewish worshippers headed to the Western Wall. 2 people were critically injured. There could have been more, except one of the guys who got injured, he was actually an IDF soldier um, who, killed this terrorist. Um, and um, then that evening, more anti-government protests in Israel, and then that whole weekend too. I don't know the exact time and dates, but there was 3 drone attacks on the Iranian ammunitions factory or factories, and then there was actually aerial attacks on Iranian shipments from Iraq into Syria. So that's actually going to raise the temperature with Iran. Okay, these attacks on things, and kind of the same thing with Israel. They've been, um, kind of going after things. I mean, they never take responsibility for it, which is good. I mean, it's kind of a good, method. They they neither confirm or deny, whether they've done these attacks, but they're going after Iranian ammunition factories in Syria, Iranian shipments, other Iranian weapons, and anything to do with Iran having, weapons or military installations. They've actually been doing this for quite a while. There's been kind of this silent war between Israel and Iran. Um, but then, so this weekend of January 28th, 29th, it was kind of like, Israel maybe did a little bit more than usual, and so raised the temperature a little bit too much. with Iran. Um, um, okay, so then the third week, which would be this week, so January 29th through today, February 4th, was when U.S. Secretary of State Blinken was in Israel. On the 31st, he was in Israel. He met with a boss. He was mentioning, okay, so this week was a bunch of people talking about the two-state solution. Blinken also promised more American funds for the Palestinians. The numbers, I mean, it's in the millions, for these terrorists. Um, so what was interesting was when he was promising more American funds for the Palestinians, it was actually on 11/9 on the Hebrew calendar. I thought that was kind of interesting. Um, on the first was more rockets from Gaza. On the second, two more rocket attacks from Gaza. Israel retaliated twice. That's when the Jewish baby was injured when his 7-year-old sister dropped him running to the bomb shelter. So that was sad. You know, so what's interesting too is the baby broke. It was a baby boy broke his hip. Okay. Um, so that's kind of interesting because I kind of think it kind of connects to Jacob fighting with the angel and his hip gets dislocated. And so a lot of times I connect Biden to the hip or to the bowels of the statue in Daniel. Um, and so that could be kind of a prophetic shadow of, um, that Biden's going to lose power. Um, what what else was happening that day was Biden was meeting with um, you know, with the Jewish baby too could be writing on the wall for Biden, but Biden never gets the writing on the wall. Um, Biden was meeting with King Abdullah II from Jordan, who was telling Biden to reign in Israel, to further the two states, to help the two-state solution get further along. Um, so all these people think they know best of how Israel should be behaving. Okay. Um, and Netanyahu was meeting with Macron in France, who was also discussing, Macron was also discussing the two-state solution. And then EU was also calling on both parties to de-escalate, both parties being Israel and the Palestinian terrorists, to de-escalate, and then a call to restart talks for the two-state solution. Okay. So that's the kind of stuff that was happening this week in Israel. Okay. Um, um, so I wanted to bring up, so I think we've seen like a fulfillment of the Rachel weeping scripture. Okay, so it comes from Jeremiah 31:15, where it says, "Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more." Okay, so what was interesting is that on January 22nd was the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Okay, so okay, so in January, okay, so one of the things is we had Roe v. Wade was overturned, but then Biden put in some bills to get some abortion pills in some of the states that don't allow abortion. I heard this story, which was horrifying to me. They actually are putting morning after pills in dispensers at George Washington's University Student Center, which is in Washington, D.C. This was in January 2023 after a student led effort. So these young college women are pushing these morning after pills, making them as easy as possible because they are worried about the fact that, Roe v. Wade has been overturned. Okay, so just horrifying. Okay. Um, and then on January 27th was Okay, so these are the different things that I think um, Rachel could be weeping about. Okay, on January 27th was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, like I mentioned before. So I think of Revelation 6:9 was when we see the souls under the altar. What's great about that story is that God says, hang on, that, okay, actually, let me look it up. Um, um, so that's actually the fifth, let's see. When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer until their fellow servants and their brethren were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. Okay. Um, so that there's that phrase, they should rest for a little while longer. Okay. Um, and so, I think, you know, I think we could see two fulfillments of the souls under the altar, because I definitely think the aborted babies under the altar um, could be a fulfillment of Revelation 6:9, but then also the people that were killed in the Holocaust. Okay, so two different fulfillments. And we see the white robes too in that passage too. Okay, a repeat of the white robes. Okay, um, but it kind of talks about like other people are going to be killed, like you have been killed, like martyred. Okay, um, so that kind of points to like the Great Tribulation, just more of God's people getting killed. Okay. And so also Rachel weeping for her children. I definitely thought about the mass shootings in America on January 21st when 11 were killed, January 23rd when 7 were killed. But then also in Israel, the terrorist attacks in Israel were on January 27th, we had 7 killed. I mean, besides like the various individuals, the smaller terrorist attacks. Okay. So Rachel has a lot of reason to weep. Okay. Um, so obviously Rachel can weep. I mean, Rachel could be a picture of America. Um, but there also could be a connection to, the Jewish people. Um, so like America weeping for the aborted babies. But then also like the women in Israel weeping for the Jewish people, weeping for those lost in the Holocaust and lost in terrorist attacks since then. Um, but I also wonder too, like if you have Rachel being a picture of America, the weeping. Okay, it says she refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Okay, so I was thinking about politically in America, we have Trump, Biden, and Pence all found with classified documents. We have the crazy Republicans that were withholding the voting, um, that they weren't voting in McCarthy the first week of January. We have radicals from both sides of the aisle. Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We have the Squad, which used to be 4 Democrat women. Now there's 9 quote unquote progressive members. I mean, progressive makes it sound like a positive thing, but they're really radical. Okay. We have George Santos, who's just been proven to be a liar, lying about everything. And so these are the type of people that are representing America in our government. And so that would definitely be a reason for America to be weeping. Okay. And then I was wondering too, January 19th, I talked about that, how we reached the debt ceiling. Biden spent all our money. Okay. So I'm wondering if that's a fulfillment of Genesis 31. where Rachel and Leo said to Jacob, "Do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price." So I definitely think Biden has fulfilled that. Okay, he's the type of Laban, um, spending all our money. Okay, um, and then let's see, and so one of the reasons we want to be weeping, okay, is so this is from Joel. It says, "Gird yourselves with sackcloth and lament, O priest. Wail, O ministers of the altar. Come, spend the night in sackcloth, O ministers of my God. For the grain offering and the drink offering are withheld from the house of your God. Consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord." Okay, so our weeping should be um, added with prayers crying out to the Lord. Okay, um, just when we see the state of affairs in America and Israel, and it's interesting because it says the grain offering and the drink offering are withheld from the house of your God. Because what we're seeing in America is that um, our sacrifices and our offerings are being offered to false idols. Okay, the idols of the left. Okay, Biden's been spending our money on, um, things that um, are not, that don't give praise to God, that are, false gods, and like the money that he gave to the Palestinians, and just a lot of other, the money that they give to climate change, quote unquote, stuff, and so just and socialistic, programs, and just a lot of stuff that aren't um, really Christian in nature, and anti-biblical stuff. Okay. And then I also threw this in from Genesis 42:36. So this kind of connects to, like, we have Trump, Biden, and now Pence with classified documents. Okay, because here we see like Jacob kind of weeping. Okay, so it says, "Their father Jacob said to them, 'You have bereaved me on my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me.'" So I'm wondering, is this a picture of Joseph? Is a picture of Trump with documents. Simeon is a picture of Biden with documents. Okay, because Simeon actually ends up getting thrown in jail. Okay, and then you would take Benjamin, could be a picture of Pence. So all these things are against me. Okay, so Jacob weeping. Okay, so what I'm looking at is, okay, so the Bible talks about times, and half a time, and so that could be a 3.5 week time frame. And so if if it's true that something happened kind of on January 14th, January 15th, to put us in a 3 week time frame, the end of the 3 weeks would be tonight finishes the 3 weeks, and then do we enter into a half a time frame, which I see as the dividing of time. I mean, it's also called the dividing of time. But is it a time of civil war, of when we actually have that division of people in America? Okay. So in Revelation 12, it says, "But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent." Okay. The woman could be America. Okay. Or Christians in America. And then in Mark 14, it says, "Immediately a rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had made the remark to him, 'Before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he began to weep." Okay, so what if the rooster crowing twice could be a picture of Trump coming back, okay, for a second time? Okay, and then the denying 3 times is Trump, Biden, and Pence, all found with classified documents, could be a possible fulfillment. I mean, there could be multiple fulfillments, let me tell you. Okay. Um, and then in Daniel 12, it says, "But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase." Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be until the end of these wonders?" I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. Okay, so powerful verses, a lot going on. What's interesting is we see this man dressed in linen. So, we see that repeat of the linen, okay? From the other verses that we talked about. Okay, so God's people dressed in linen. Um, um, okay, so we see, okay, so it says, so Daniel was told to conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. So what I'm wondering is if in the last 3.5 weeks of the tribulation period, God's book is like completely concealed. Okay, the truth is completely concealed. Okay, and then we have this thing, many will go back and forth. And okay, so I wonder if that connects to, we see Noah releases a raven and it goes back and forth. Okay, and so I got that coming up. Um, but then it says knowledge will increase. So we do see, um, um, kind of like hidden mysteries being revealed during this time. Okay. Like, I mean, it was kind of interesting that, how long has Biden had these documents and they resurfaced? Okay. Um, and then we have the 2 people standing on the 2 banks of the river. Okay. So definitely Trump and Pence. Okay. And the one man above the waters of the river could be a picture of the Messiah. Okay. And then what does he say? He said it'd be for a time, times, and half a time. Okay. And, so definitely there's some time, times, and half a time that kind of wraps up the tribulation period. Okay. Before Jesus comes back. So I don't know if I've hit on the 3 weeks. We just got to see what happens. Okay. But even still, time, times, and half time might not be 3.5 weeks, but it could be 3.5 weeks. And then it's interesting, it says as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people. So we've already seen that on January 19th was when Biden spent all our money. Okay. But definitely we see that God's people just don't have a lot of power right now. Okay. So definitely think we're pretty close to the fulfillment of that. Okay. Um, so those are those verses. Okay. So then talking about the 3.5 weeks, it's okay, so this is another place, like we see kind of the 3.5 weeks all throughout scripture. Okay. Like repeated. Okay. Like one place I just saw this morning was, we have Lamech lives till 777 and then he dies. And then it discusses Noah being 500 years old. Okay, so you have Lamech being 777 years old is the 3 weeks. 7 days, 7 plus 7 days plus 7 days. And then with Noah being 500 years old, that connects to the dividing of time, the 5. Okay. And so then in these verses, it says Then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned him into the ark, where the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. So he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. So if the raven was sent out, okay, the raven being sent out, so what I got is on January 21st was when we had the anti-police riots. So I'm wondering if the raven, like I said, it's a return of the BLM rioters, the anti-police rioters, okay? So that was January 21st was when kind of the return of them, okay? So then 7 days later is January 28th. And so that was a dove being sent out. Okay, that's when Trump had like two rallies in South Carolina and New Hampshire, but they didn't land, so to speak. Okay, actually, they weren't rallies. Okay, they weren't a typical Trump rally. It was more just like a meeting or something like that. Um, um, and so that then I'm wondering if 7 days later is February 4th, where the dove is sent out and returns with the freshly picked olive leaf. Okay, so is that a picture of Biden being plucked? And then 7 days later is February 11th, where the dove is sent out and does not return. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, my weeks don't really work out because I have my first 7 days being the 15th through the 21st. Anyways, it's more like 28 days than 21 days or something, the way kind of I have it written out here. But I mean, maybe it will still work. We'll see what happens. Okay, so we just got to see if anything happens. Like, I'm looking at midnight tonight to see on February 4th to see what might happen. So, um, anyways, so I'm thinking like, like I said, the Raven could be a picture of these BLM rioters, going back and forth. The riots are in different cities and stuff like that. I'm thinking of Trump. The dove could definitely represent Trump because he's the peace guy, the peace deal guy. It could also represent Netanyahu too. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how this gets fulfilled. And then there's also this concept of the second Passover, which I've talked about before, but we'll review it. It says, "For the king and his princes and all the assembly in Jerusalem had decided to celebrate the Passover in the second month, since they could not celebrate it at that time because the priests had not consecrated themselves in sufficient numbers, nor had the people been gathered to Jerusalem." And then in Numbers 9, we also read about the second Passover. "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, if any one of you or of your generations becomes unclean because of a dead person or is on a distant journey, he may, however, observe the Passover to the Lord in the second month on the 14th day at twilight. They shall observe it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs." So, so the kind of the concept of the second Passover is that God's people were unclean for the first Passover, and so then he needed to set up a second Passover for them to celebrate. Okay, and so the reason why they'd be unclean is they didn't consecrate themselves, they didn't set themselves apart before the first Passover. Or there was a dead person, or they were on a distant journey that kept them from celebrating the first Passover. Okay, So I'm wondering if God's people, they weren't consecrated yet. They weren't set apart from Biden and Trump for the first Passover. Okay. Um, so we'll see if they're ready for the second Passover. Um, and so what I'm wondering is, um, you know, so one of the reasons why I'm looking at today is February 4th would be like a seventh day, and then we're moving into an eighth day. Um, let's see, February 4th moving into, I gotta get my February calendar out here. Okay, moving into February 5th would be a switch from the seventh day to the eighth day. Okay. And so, um, because I believe that Biden is the seventh king and Trump is the returning eighth king, or, he's the sixth king that returns to be the eighth king. Okay. And so, so I kind of am looking to like a Saturday night to a Sunday morning kind of event, you know, um, but I could be missing it. Okay. And so I was looking to see if there was anything that made February 4th a 14th day. Okay. For the Passover in the second month, the 14th day. Okay. So it is 14 days after the Roe v. Wade anniversary. February 5th is actually the 11th month, the 14th day on the Hebrew calendar, so that could be really significant. But then, of course, we have February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, and it's actually the Armenian Candlemas, um, is, actually the second month, the 14th day on the Gregorian calendar. Okay. So that's a possibility. But then my whole thing of the 3 weeks or whatever just doesn't work. Um, unless there is maybe a 28-day thing in scripture and I'm seeing it as a 21-day. I don't know totally. So we'll see what happens. Okay. One thing that's interesting is February 6th is the new year for trees. Okay. And then February 15th is actually the Orthodox Candlemas. So those could be significant dates too. Okay. February 6th is also the 11th month, the 15th day. Okay. So I'm not really sure. We'll just have to see how it plays out. This is the scripture. I talked about this in my last video about the end of 2 full years, but um, what we see in the second dream is the thin corn eats the fat corn. Okay, so that could be a picture of Trump's people coming back and eating the fat, which now the 7 plump and full heirs are definitely a picture of. And see, it's interesting because I kind of think of Trump and Netanyahu as being the 2 witnesses, so they're connected to the eyes. Okay. And I got Trump connected to, I got Biden connected to the ears. Okay. And so because, so when you see seeing in the scripture, you think of the 2 witnesses. When you see hearing in the scriptures, you think of Biden. One of the things that one of the reasons is the animal. I think it's the leopard that's connected to the beast from the sea. And if you look at the leopard, he's got 2 ears that stick up. They're definitely a prominent feature. Okay. But then we also get ears from this chapter, Genesis 41, and the ears are fat and plumped. Okay, 7 plump and full ears. Okay, and that's definitely connected to Biden, where he's plumped up all his people with America's money. Okay, and so the thin ears come and they eat the fat corn. Okay, so that could be a picture of Trump's people coming to civil war against Biden's fat people. Okay, fat ears of corn. Okay, and and that happens after 2 full years. So we're at the 2-year time frame. Okay, and I kind of think Biden only gets 2 years. Okay, so if the Lord tarries and this goes on any longer, I'm going to be really surprised. Okay, and then one of the things too I wanted to point out was Winter Storm Mara. Okay, because that was fascinating. Um, let's see. January 31st was the 11th month, the ninth day on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, that was when we had the winter storm Mara. Okay, so that's the name that the Weather Channel gave to the storm. Okay, and so I think that connects to Ruth, the book of Ruth. And so Ruth and Naomi, they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter in law, who returned from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Okay, so it's interesting that Mara connects to bitterness because with these winter storms, it's really like the bitter cold of winter. Okay, and we saw Winter Storm Mara just went across um, the country, just like some of these previous storms, and it got the west, and then it got um, the southern states with freezing rain, um, and then it was in the northeast the last couple of days. Okay, just bitter cold temperatures too. The wind chill. I mean, I think the one number I heard, it was down to minus 106-degree wind chill. Um, so just freezing. I mean, just and you can't even be outside that long. You'll get frost, bitten. Um, so, anyways, and so I also brought in Jeremiah 9:11, because it says, "I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant." I don't think that really connects to the winter storm Mara, but it was just interesting that the winter storm Mara was on the 11th month, ninth day on the Hebrew calendar. Um, and then in Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Now it came about on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. So is the 3 days, night or day, the 3 weeks? Okay. And so it's interesting because it's like the Jews are fasting for 3 days, night or day. And so that would be the 3 weeks in Israel. And then Esther and her maidens would be the Americans fasting for 3 weeks in America. Okay. But then I could be kind of like not quite getting it because now we have Esther going on the third day. Okay. So maybe there's still 3 more days to come. Okay. Which would bring it, and see, if you have the 3 weeks going to today, then the third day would be 5th, 6th, the 7th. Okay. So I'm just not really sure. Um, I mean, it's kind of weird because that like skips over the new year for trees on the 6th. So, I'm just not really sure, but that's a possibility. We'll see how it gets fulfilled. We see in part. Okay. What was interesting too is that, but it is possible with the third day that the third day could be like the third day after Groundhog Day. Okay, so Groundhog Day is second, third, and fourth are 1, 2, 3. So that brings us to the fourth, like tonight or something. I don't know. We'll see. Um, and then too, Esther putting on her royal robes and standing in the inner court could be a picture of Trump, like claiming leadership and standing in the inner court of like Washington D.C. or whatever, claiming leadership. Okay, because there's that verse that I told you that where it says, don't go in if you're in the field, don't go into the city to get your coat, or whatever that verse was. Okay. Um, so the coat or the royal robes is a picture of leadership. Okay, so Groundhog Day. So the groundhog saw a shadow this year. So 6 more weeks of winter. Okay. What's interesting in the Groundhog movie, with Bill Murray, is that there's a feeling of doom when the clock flips over to 6 o'clock. Okay, so I found this picture that made the clock 666, instead of 6 o'clock in the morning. Um, because I do think that there's a possibility that this groundhog saying there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter is really a prophecy saying that Trump's going to return. We're going to see the sixth king come back, okay? And he's going to bring winter with him, okay? Although we already kind of brought winter with his deal of the century, and then we had the coronavirus. And it was interesting because they called the coronavirus a type of Groundhog Day, where because we were in shutdown, it was like we were living the same day over and over and over again. It was like we were living Groundhog Day. So they already connected, kind of Trump to like this Groundhog Day with with COVID and the shutdowns. What's interesting too about Groundhog Day, it was a snowstorm in the movie, okay? And then that whole concept of repeating the day. So, are we going to see the return of Trump and a second January 6th? Okay. I mean, I do believe we are going to see that. Okay. What's interesting about February 6th is that could be the date that we see the second January 6th, because like the first January 6th was 1/6, and then the second January 6th is 2/6. Okay, so that's a possibility. Okay. Just thought I'd point that out. And then because Esther ends up going to the king, which is not according to the law, and says, if I perish, I perish. Okay, so we have Trump's peeps willing to die for their holy war. Okay. I did a different way of, doing the prophecy for Esther 4, because I had Trump's peeps mourning, Trump's peeps being the Jews who mourn for 3 days, night or day, and then Biden's peeps mourning, being the maidens. I and my maidens. So I did that slightly differently there. But I wanted, to repeat this picture of, this is the picture of the documents in Trump's house. We don't have any pictures. I haven't seen any pictures of the documents in Biden's house. They didn't want to make an example of him. So man of lawlessness, okay. And it says, which I connect to Trump, although I said that Netanyahu, could fulfill some of this stuff too. He's also a lawless man. Okay, but it says, and you know what restrains him now, so that in his time he will be revealed. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, only he who restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Then that lawless one will be revealed, who the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That is, the one whose coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. Okay, so I definitely think we're waiting for the lawless one to be revealed. It's interesting that it's verse 8. Okay. I think Biden right now is restraining Trump. Okay, but Biden's going to be taken out of the way. Okay. So I don't think I have any more comments on that. Okay, but don't go either left or right, so you shall observe to do just as the Lord your God has commanded. Do not turn aside to the right or left. Okay, so we got thieves on both sides of Jesus. Okay. And in Luke 22:24 we see, and there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest. Okay. we definitely see that between the right and the left, that they're all saying they're great and the other side's bad. Okay. Um, so you can ignore some of this other stuff. The 10 days of testing, I don't really think that worked out. Um, I mean, maybe it did, because 10 days after Biden, on the 9th was when they revealed that he had documents, so 10 days of, are you going to, um, believe that Biden's a good person or not? Like, um, you know, because I mean, there's just, the debate or the dispute was they were saying that Biden was a good guy with the documents and Trump was a bad guy. But Biden's, also a bad guy too with the documents, So, um, let's see. Um, okay, so I left in some of the previous slides, and so some of this information might not really apply anymore. But I left this in because it says, thus it came about on the third day. Okay, so ignore that I said third Christmas. That didn't work out. So, okay, but it came about on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among all his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Trump and his followers don't remember Jesus the Messiah, and they try to establish their own messianic kingdom. I think they go to war against Jesus and his followers. But God uses Trump and his followers to bring the cup of judgment to Biden and his followers. Okay. And then, okay, so you could ignore these dates. I mean, anyways, there's some extraneous information which we don't have to pay attention to. Skip this one. I talked about it in my last video. But other stuff. Okay, so searching Joseph's brother's sacks for the cup connects to searching Jacob's and his wife's tent for the idols. Okay, in the scriptures. So there's a couple different places where they're searching for things. Okay, and then it also kind of connects to when Jesus and his followers, he has a few of his followers are in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus keeps popping by and he's like, "Are you still sleeping?" And so that happens like 3 times. I think that actually connects to the times and half the time too, that story. But it's interesting because I connect these stories in the scriptures to the searching for documents in Biden's house and Trump's house. I don't know if we're going to see any more searching like at Pence's house, and I really think they should search Obama's house, but I don't think that's going to happen. And then what's interesting is that Rachel tries to hide Laban's idols in her saddle, okay? So we saw Biden trying to hide the fact about the documents, his documents, okay? What's interesting too is that we read in the fiery furnace story, the fiery furnace gets 7 times hotter. So is that a picture of the Great Tribulation? Okay, so possibly. Okay, so we got the Sea of Biden on one side, the Sea of Trump on the other side. You want to be in the middle, dry land with Messiah. Okay. So it says, Revelation 16:19, it says, the great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. Okay. So Babylon, I'm thinking now that it's interesting because there's some connections to Trump with like maybe the second chapter where it talks about Babylon is like it's an economic city. I see that connected to Trump, But the first chapter, Revelation 17, talks about Babylon, where you have the woman riding the beast. Okay. And so that could be like America riding Biden, okay, of being the beast, or Biden's the woman and the beast is Obama. That's a possibility. Or the beast is, their false theology. Um, so, anyways, but we're going to see the great city split into three parts. Okay, that's what we're waiting for, is America to be split into three parts, and then the Civil War starts. Okay, and it's interesting because that causes the cities of the nations to fall too. Okay, and then Babylon gets remembered to give her the cup of the wine of the fierce wrath, and so that connects to the cupbearer who puts the cup of judgment or cup of wrath into, Trump puts the cup of wrath into Biden's hands. Okay. I mean, until it gets around to, then God deals with Trump. Okay. Um, okay. So those are my thoughts about us being in the Great Tribulation. Just kind of just keeping you up on what's going on right now. So we just got to wait and see how it all gets played out. So thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate you listening. So just my prayers for you are for God's grace during this difficult time in the world. The birth pangs are getting harder. Definitely. So just hang in there, cry out to God. Take your tears and turn them into prayers to God during this time. Because we have so many promises in the Psalms where God's going to hear our prayers and set us free from our slavery um, in Egypt. Um, so hang in there. Really, the Messiah has just got to be at the door. It's got to be really short. And so, like those verses say, it's times, and half the time, however that ends up getting fulfilled, it's a short time. Okay. So hang in there. And just God bless. Thanks for listening.